The night was still, unnervingly so, as though the world itself was holding its breath. In the quiet town of Veiro, tucked between pale hills and restless forests, a house sat on the edge of solitude. From the outside, it looked ordinary, the kind of home where family dinners were eaten on time, laughter echoed down hallways, and the air was perfumed by the comfort of belonging. But inside that house lived the Arvin family, and inside their carefully arranged smiles was a secret that would, in time, unravel everything. Saras Arvin had always been the quiet one, the youngest child, the dependable daughter, the one who listened more than she spoke, who lingered at the edges of conversations but never interrupted them. To outsiders, she seemed content, perhaps even simple. But those who lived under the same roof knew her differently. They knew her patience, her memory, and her tendency to watch silently, as though she was recording everything for a purpose nobody understood. Her older brother, Halric, did not take her seriously. He was golden in the family's eyes, the pride and promise of the Arvins. Halric was charming, endlessly charismatic, the type of man who could make lies sound like truths and betrayals sound like necessity. He learned early that people wanted to believe in him, and so he gave them something to believe in, even if it was hollow. He manipulated, twisted, and smiled through it all, leaving behind those who doubted him. And in the Arvin household, it was Saras who doubted him most. Their parents, Elira and Don Delvin, were enthralled by Halric, blind to the cracks in his charm. They overlooked the cruelty, the manipulations, the way he shifted blame onto Saras whenever something went wrong. It became tradition that if there was a problem, somehow Saras was at its center. She was scolded for small mistakes, punished for things she didn't do, and quietly left to carry the burdens her brother cast aside. Yet she bore it all with assignments that unnerved Halric, though he never admitted it. What Halric never understood, what none of them understood, was that silence is not the same as surrender. Silence can be sharp. Silence can cut deeper than words. And Saras's silence was a well into which she poured every humiliation, every injustice, every betrayal, storing them carefully like a miser with his gold. She learned to wait, to bide her time, to study her family's rhythms until she understood them better than they understood themselves. The betrayal that broke her resolve came on a winter evening. She was 20, Halric 24. He had convinced their parents that she had stolen money from the household accounts, a fabrication woven from half-truths and clever manipulations. He presented forged evidence, manipulated transactions, whispered just enough poison into Elira and Donvan's ears to make them believe it. They confronted her, angry, disappointed, and when she denied it, they looked at her with hollow eyes that spoke more than words. They believed him, not her. She was disowned that night, cast out into the snow with little more than a suitcase, no explanations, no justice, only the cold sting of betrayal burning through her veins. She begged them to believe her, but Halric stood tall behind them, his expression a mask of righteous sorrow. She caught the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes before the door closed, and that flicker became the ember of her vengeance. For years she wandered, finding her way through jobs, shelters, and distant towns. She built herself piece by piece, learning how to survive without the safety of family, without the illusion of belonging. She grew strong, not just in body, but in will. And with every passing day, she sharpened the memory of what had been taken from her. Revenge did not consume her at once. It grew slowly, curling like smoke around her heart, whispering to her that she would not die forgotten, that she would not forgive. She studied Halric from a distance. The world was smaller than it seemed. and his presence was hard to ignore. He rose in prominence, becoming not just the favored son, but a figure admired beyond their town. He married, gained wealth, and basked in the glow of admiration from those too blind to see through his charm. But Ceres saw. She always saw. She knew the lies he told, the schemes he built, the fragile glass palace he constructed around himself. And she promised herself that one day she would be the hand that shattered it. Ceres's revenge was never going to be quick. Quick would have been merciful, and mercy was a currency she no longer possessed. She began with patience, watching his routines, studying his habits, quietly weaving herself into the edges of his life. She befriended people on the outskirts of his circle, planting seeds of doubt where none had existed before. Small lies, easily dismissed, but remembered when the truth was later revealed. She nudged whispers into the right ears, stirred suspicions so faint that Halric didn't notice them until they began to take shape. The first strike came quietly. A business deal Halric had carefully cultivated unraveled when documents he thought secure were leaked, exposing inconsistencies that embarrassed him publicly. Nobody suspected Ceres, not even Halric. How could they, when she was supposedly far away, forgotten? But the sting of humiliation gnawed at him, and though he blamed others, a seed of paranoia was planted. Next came his friendships. Ceres rekindled old connections, always under different names, always just distant enough to remain invisible. She exposed Halric's secrets in subtle ways, making it seem as though he himself was careless. A private joke repeated in public, a hidden affair hinted at during a conversation, a lie contradicted by conveniently timed evidence. His friends began to wonder, to question, to distance themselves, and Halric, for the first time, began to feel the sting of isolation. Years passed, and with each one, Ceres grew more precise. She wanted him to unravel slowly, to watch his confidence crack inch by inch. She wanted him to feel what she had felt, alone, mistrusted, betrayed by the people he loved most. And so she turned her attention to his wife, a woman named Leora, who had never seen the darkness behind his smile. Through carefully placed messages, fabricated coincidences, and subtle manipulations, Ceres introduced doubt into their marriage. At first, it was small. Questions about Halric's absences, curiosity about unexplained expenses. But doubt is a poison, and once it enters, it spreads. Halric began to notice. He saw the way Leora's eyes lingered on him when he answered too quickly, the way his friends hesitated before trusting his word. He felt the walls closing in, though he didn't know who was pushing them. And through it all, Ceres remained hidden, a ghost in the shadows, savoring every fracture, every splinter in the life he had stolen from her. The psychological toll began to show. Halric, once so composed, became restless. He snapped at allies, distrusted his friends, clung too tightly to Leora. His charm grew brittle, his mask slipping in moments of anger. And the more he faltered, the more Ceres pushed. A misplaced letter here, a whispered rumor there. Always small, always deniable, but always cutting deeper. Ceres knew she could have stopped. She knew she could have left him to collapse under his own weight. But revenge had become her life, her purpose, her identity. She had been stripped of everything, her family, her name, her place in the world. And so she devoted herself to the one thing that remained, the slow, unrelenting destruction of the brother who betrayed her. The final act was not yet near, but the stage was being set. Halric did not know it, but the storm had only begun to gather. And Ceres, silent and patient as ever, was ready to let it break over him in ways he could not imagine. Halric's world was beginning to tilt, though to outsiders it still seemed intact. He was still the man people admired, the man with a magnetic smile and steady confidence. But behind that smile lay cracks that widened by the day. He told himself that his missteps were small, that his friends had simply grown envious, that Leora was distracted by her own insecurities. Yet in quiet moments, he couldn't shake the gnawing thought. Someone was pulling strings he couldn't see. For Saris, those quiet moments were the sweetest. She had learned his rhythm so well that she could predict not only his actions, but his emotions. She knew when he was weakest, when his doubts whispered loudest, and it was then that she would strike, not with a sword, but with shadows. A misplaced receipt suggesting he had spent money he hadn't. An old acquaintance of his suddenly resurfacing with questions that hinted at betrayal. Leora, his wife, was at first reluctant to believe the whispers. She had loved him, built a life with him, trusted him. But Saris was patient. She never revealed too much too quickly. She let Leora uncover truths on her own, carefully feeding her breadcrumbs until doubt became conviction. Soon, Leora began keeping secrets of her own, meeting with friends to discuss her worries, quietly checking his accounts, watching him more closely than she ever had before. Ulrich noticed. He saw it in her eyes, the hesitation before she smiled, the question she didn't ask out loud. And though he insisted on his innocence, his protests rang hollow, because even he had lost faith in his own story. He had lied so many times in his life that he no longer remembered which lies were still hidden and which had already been uncovered. Saris felt the power of it all, but she also felt the cost. Revenge had become her oxygen, and without it, she felt hollow. She no longer sought friendships or built her own life. She lived in the shadows of Ulrich's, pulling at threads and savoring his unraveling. The satisfaction was sharp but fleeting, and when the nights grew long, she sometimes wondered who she was without her hatred. Yet each time that doubt stirred, she thought of the snow the night she had been cast out, of the door slamming shut, of Ulrich's eyes filled with smug triumph, and her resolve hardened again. The second act of her vengeance required patience and cruelty in equal measure. She began weaving a story of infidelity, not one she invented from nothing, but one she built on his own past misdeeds. Ulrich had always been careless with boundaries, too charming for his own good. Flirtations, half-truths, and late nights had left a trail, and Sarah's collected every scrap. She forged connections between old names and new suspicions, slipped fragments of evidence into places Leora would find them, and created coincidences that seemed too sharp to ignore. The moment came when Leora confronted him. It was not a dramatic scene, but a quiet conversation late at night, filled with pauses too heavy to endure. She asked where he had been, why his stories didn't align, why people spoke of things he swore he hadn't done. Ulrich, caught between lies, stumbled. His voice faltered, his explanations twisted into contradictions, and though he begged her to believe him, she saw through him in a way she never had before. That night marked the beginning of the end of their marriage. Trust is fragile, and once shattered, it cannot be mended with apologies. Leora pulled away, emotionally and physically, leaving Ulrich more alone than he had ever been. And in the silence of that distance, Saris found her triumph. But the victory was bittersweet. Watching them break apart, Saris felt not only satisfaction, but also a strange emptiness. She had destroyed what he loved, but in doing so, she realized she had touched something innocent. Leora had been collateral, a woman guilty of nothing but trust, yet now she was broken too. Saris told herself it was necessary, that in war there are always casualties, but the thought lingered, a whisper in her mind she could not fully silence. Ulrich spiraled further. Friends distanced themselves, his marriage faltered, and his once sterling reputation began to tarnish. He grew paranoid, convinced that everyone was against him, though he still could not trace the hand that guided his fall. He accused his friends of betrayal, his wife of conspiracy, even his parents of mistrust. And as he lashed out, he pushed them all further away. Elira and Donvin, their parents, struggled to understand. They had always seen Halric as golden, untouchable, but now they watched him unravel. They tried to help, but he rebuffed them, his pride too fragile to admit weakness. Saris watched them too, and though she still carried the wound of their betrayal, she felt a pang of sorrow for them. They had been blind, yes, but they had also been deceived. Part of her wanted to hurt them as she hurt Halric, but another part longed for their recognition, their apology, their love. She told herself she would wait. If they deserved punishment, it would come naturally, through their disappointment in the son they had chosen over her. That would be her justice. Halric began to see shadows in every corner. He believed his home was watched, his letters tampered with, his friends secretly mocking him. He set traps, small tests of loyalty, but they always failed, not because others betrayed him, but because Saris was there, manipulating outcomes, ensuring that every suspicion he had was confirmed. He began to lose sleep, pacing the floors at night, whispering to himself that he would find the traitor, that he would not be undone. And then came the cruelest twist. He started to suspect Leora. In his paranoia, he accused her of conspiring against him, of working with enemies, of plotting his ruin. The accusations shattered what little remained between them. She left him soon after, unable to bear the weight of his mistrust. And when she did, Saris was waiting in the wings, not to comfort her, but to ensure she never returned. By then, Halric was a hollow shell of the man he once was. The golden boy had tarnished, his charm faded into bitterness, his confidence into paranoia. Yet still he fought to cling to what remained, desperate to rebuild, to prove himself again. That was when Saris decided it was time to turn her attention to their parents. She knew they had not seen her in years. To them, she was still the guilty daughter, the thief who had betrayed them. But now, after Halric's collapse, they were vulnerable. They questioned themselves, wondered if they had misunderstood, if they had been blinded by their love for him. Saris did not appear before them, not yet, but she made sure they saw the cracks clearly. She arranged for them to overhear whispers, for letters to reach them, for evidence of Halric's cruelty to slip into their hands. Slowly, painfully, they began to realize the truth, that the daughter they had cast aside had been innocent, and the son they had exalted had been the true betrayer. It was a revelation that broke them, and though Saris should have felt triumph, she felt only a hollow ache. She had her justice, but it came with the bitter taste of years lost, of love wasted, of wounds that no victory could truly heal. Halric, meanwhile, felt the weight of abandonment in every corner of his life. Friends gone, wife gone, parents doubting, reputation ruined. He searched desperately for answers, but every path led back to himself. And though he could not prove it, though he could not see her face, he began to whisper her name in the dark. Saris. He did not know how or when or why, but he felt her presence in every failure, every humiliation. The realization gnawed at him, but it also drove him to madness, for if she truly was behind it all, then she had been patient beyond measure, relentless beyond reason. And that thought terrified him more than anything else. For Saris, the game was nearly complete. She had undone him, piece by piece, stripped away everything he valued, left him hollow and broken. But she knew there was one step left, the final reckoning, the moment when he would face her not as the sister he betrayed, but as the architect of his ruin. And though she longed for it, though she craved the satisfaction of seeing his recognition, she also feared it. For what would she be once it was done? Without her revenge, what life remained for her? She had spent years building this masterpiece of destruction, and when it ended, she feared she would end too. The storm was ready to break. All that remained was the final confrontation, the moment where Helric would see the truth and Saris would see whether victory brought peace or only emptiness. The night was heavy with rain when Helric finally broke. His once flawless composure had dissolved into a man pacing the echo of his own footsteps, muttering to himself in the hollow mansion that felt less like home and more like a cage. He had been left with nothing. No friends, no wife, parents who looked at him with sorrow instead of pride. He spent long hours staring at mirrors, trying to recognize the face that stared back at him, but all he saw was the reflection of a stranger. He whispered her name sometimes when he was alone. Saris. The name carried like a ghost through his chest, a shadow in the corner of his vision. He hadn't seen her in years, hadn't heard her voice since the night she had been cast out, but he felt her everywhere. In every ruin of his life, he sensed her hand, precise and merciless. He told himself it couldn't be true, that nobody could hold such patience, such cruelty, but in his heart, he knew. And Saris knew too. She had planned for this moment, every step designed to lead him here, broken, alone, stripped of everything he had once used to define himself. Yet when she stood in the rain outside his mansion that night, watching the lights flicker through the windows, she hesitated. The years of waiting, of weaving shadows, of feeding her soul with vengeance, it all led to this. But she asked herself again, what comes after? Her hand trembled as she knocked. The sound was soft, almost drowned by the storm, but it made Helric freeze. He wasn't expecting anyone. There was no one left to visit him. He opened the door, and when he saw her, his breath stopped. For a long moment they simply stared. She looked older, harder, her eyes sharper than he remembered, but he knew her instantly. And in her gaze he saw it, the truth he had suspected but never confirmed. The architect of his ruin stood before him, calm, unflinching, carrying years of silence in the weight of her presence. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was you." Saris didn't speak at first. She let the silence stretch, let him feel the weight of recognition. Then softly she said, "It was always going to be me." He staggered back, a man caught between rage and despair. How? How could you wait this long? Why? She stepped inside, her eyes never leaving his. "Because you took everything from me. You turned our parents against me, cast me into the cold, left me with nothing but the memory of your smirk as the door closed. Do you know what it is to be erased? To have your life stolen, your name dragged through dirt, your family's love poisoned against you? That night, you ended who I was, Helric. All I've done since then has been for this moment." Helric sank into a chair, his hands shaking. "You destroyed me." "No," she corrected, her voice like ice. "I showed you what it feels like to be destroyed. You ruined me once in a single night. I returned the favor over years, inch by inch, so you would savor every cut."
His eyes filled with tears, but there was no redemption in them, only horror. "You took everything, my friends, my wife, my reputation, even our parents. They chose you over me," Sarah said sharply, "but even they can no longer deny who you are. They see now. That is punishment enough." The silence that followed was unbearable. Helric's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths as the truth settled into his bones. There was no undoing it, no rebuilding. His life was ash, and the person he had once believed weakest had become the flame that burned him. But then he asked the question that pierced deeper than she expected. "And what about you, Saris? What do you have now? Without me to destroy, who are you?" For the first time, she faltered. Her words caught in her throat, because he was right. Her life had been revenge, every heartbeat tuned to his downfall, and now standing over his ruin, she felt both triumph and emptiness. She had won, yes, but in winning, she had lost herself. "I am the truth," she said finally, though even to her own ears it sounded weak. "I am the reckoning you never thought would come." Ulrich laughed then, a broken, bitter laugh. "And when the reckoning is over, you'll be nothing. You've tied your life to me, Saris. Without me, you disappear again." His words struck deeper than any blade because they revealed the cost of her vengeance. She had become a ghost, existing only to haunt him, and now that the haunting was complete, she was adrift. Saris felt tears prick her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Instead, she leaned close, her voice low and cutting. "Perhaps I disappear, but you will live every day knowing I outlasted you, outthought you, outplayed you. You will live with the knowledge that the sister you discarded destroyed you completely. That is the legacy you cannot escape." She turned then, leaving him slumped in the shadows of his hollow mansion. She did not look back, because looking back would mean admitting she wanted more. An apology, perhaps, or some shred of reconciliation. But she knew Hallerik too well. There would be no apology, only the echo of her name whispered in his sleepless nights. Outside, the storm had eased, leaving the world damp and silent. Saris walked into the darkness, her steps steady but her heart heavy. She had her revenge, but the victory was jagged. She had proven her strength, but at the cost of her own life, her own future. She was not the same girl who had been cast out, but neither was she free. She carried her triumphs like a crown of thorns, glorious but painful, always pressing into her skin. Hallerik never recovered. He spent his days wandering the ruins of his life, muttering about shadows and ghosts. His name became a cautionary tale, his charm remembered only as a mask that had cracked. And though nobody could prove who had pulled the strings, whispers spread of a reckoning that had come for him quiet and relentless, as though vengeance itself had taken human form. Saris disappeared once more, but not into obscurity. She became a myth in her own right, a whispered name among those who spoke of betrayal and justice. Some said she was ruthless, others that she was righteous, but none could deny her power. And in the stillness of her solitude, she carried her both her triumph and her loss, knowing that vengeance had cost her everything and given her nothing but the hollow satisfaction of watching her brother's ruin. And so the story ended not with peace, but with silence. The silence of a house emptied by betrayal, the silence of a sister who had waited too long, the silence of a victory that tasted like ashes.